welcome to this week's Our Performance Tips. My name is Jessica Morgan, and I will be your host today. It is my privilege to introduce to you Jason Brustad. He is one of our performance improvement specialists. He'll be talking today on how failure leads to success. Looking to fail in order to succeed, how mobilizing a saturation diving system can increase your organization's performance. Before we get started, I want to go over the On24 platform for you. This is a new platform for some of you, so some of the tips here, if you look to the left, you will see some information regarding our speaker, Jason. You'll see the little media player, which is where mine and Jason's faces will pop up. You'll also see the box where you can submit questions to us. And then off to the right, you will notice that little yellow sphere that will take you to our website. You'll also notice a button there to register for next week's Our Performance Tips. These are weekly 30-minute check-ins with some information that you can hopefully take and apply to your everyday life, to your professional life. So again, feel free to join us each week. And then at the bottom, you will notice a spot to register for this coming Friday's continuing education event. Once a month, we do hour-long trainings, and this week's will be with Joe SD Sr., and he will be discussing the change management model that the OPT has put together. And then at the very bottom, you'll notice a menu down there. That menu will allow you to send an email to the team. It will allow you to share this webcast out with your social networks. And some of these boxes, you can move around and play with them to get the screen exactly how you want it. So feel free to minimize things, move them around, make them bigger. Just feel free to play around. And without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce you to Jason Brustad.
All right. Thanks, Jess, so much. Glad to be with you all here today. Appreciate you taking time out for your lunch schedule to join us here and learn a little bit about how failing can help you succeed. And we're going to kind of surround this event here with saturation diving. And certainly I want to start off giving you a background on sat diving and some of the bigger differences there. And first of all, one of the first and foremost is on air diving, you can actually return to the surface and drink a beer after your dive. Sat diving, you cannot. So that's one of the big ticket items there. So with that being said, we'll jump right in. So the problem that we have here is you have to control the pressure. And I'm going to give you some background on the physiology there. If the pressure isn't controlled, and this will make more sense as we get into it, you can develop bubbles in your blood, and that actually is coming from a nitrogen bubble. It can hang up in your arteries, your capillaries, your veins, and it can result in a number of symptoms such as type 1 decompression sickness or DCS symptoms, which we call cutis marmorata. There's a few others, but here's what one looks like. Or of course, if things get a little more troubling, you can get into what we call type 2 symptoms. There you probably have a bubble that's hanging up on your central nervous system, and that's a bad day. So, well, how do you get a bubble in your bloodstream? Well, we're going to look to William Henry to kind of help us through that. William Henry, if you don't know, was an English chemist born back in the late 1700s, and he was pretty good about a few things. In dive school, we were quickly introduced, excuse me, to Henry's law, which we also referred to as the law of absorption. Basically, Henry's law stated that the amount of gas that will absorb into a solution is directly proportional to the partial pressure of that gas. So when you dive, the air you breathe, broken down there as you can see, that nitrogen is actually absorbed into your bloodstream. It changes to a liquid state. And this is fine as long as you control the pressure. When you control the pressure, the gas or nitrogen is in equilibrium and stays in solution. Additionally, your body will continue to absorb the nitrogen you're breathing until your bloodstream becomes saturated. At that point, you can't take on any more nitrogen regardless of how long you stay at that same pressure. It's much like trying to continue adding more chocolate powder to your glass of chocolate milk. You actually reach a point where you can't add any more powder to the milk. So, well, here's where things get a little dicey, though. When pressure is decreased, such as say as when you start to ascend to the surface following a dive, the gas you've been breathing, the nitrogen, will start to come out of solution. If the pressure is controlled, the majority of the gas will come out of solution at the air exchange interface within your lungs. That's where it should take place. However, if that pressure is released too quickly, meaning you came up too fast or you came up too soon, well, then your blood could kind of resemble the Diet Coke here. That's a bad day. So how do you control pressure, especially when diving? Well, let's take a look at it. Here you're looking at an air decompression table. Air diving is a very inefficient way if you're going to dive deep. So based upon this particular table here that you see, and we always use a standard 30-foot per minute ascent rate. So when you start to ascend from a dive, that's your travel rate. You should, if you're at 100 feet, well, you should be at 70 feet within a minute. But say you wanted to go to 220 feet. That's a pretty deep dive, not really by lengthwise, but let's take a look at it. And say you wanted to spend 35 minutes there. Well, if you did that, you could not come directly to the surface. That'd be a bad day, much like the Coke bottle there. Apologize if I came out of screen there. Hopefully you can see me a little bit better now. No, if you made a 220-foot dive for 35 minutes, you're actually going to have to come up to 80 feet first. And it's going to take you just under 5 minutes to get there. Once you get to 80 feet, you're going to stay there for about 3 minutes, and then you can come up to 70 feet. You're going to stay there for about 5 minutes, and then you'll come up to 60 feet, stay there 9 minutes, and I'd be willing to bet that most of you understand where this is playing out. So in the end run, to make that dive, you're going to spend a little over 5.5 hours of decompressing. Not very efficient there. But fortunately, along came a man, and his name was Bond, George Bond, that is. Dr. George Bond was a young Navy physician who took interest in William Henry's work and how it related to diving, and started to pen his theory back in November of 1957. His paper, A Proposal for Underwater Research, discussed that the successful extension of man's capacity in the sea was limited without a further look into the challenges of sending humans to greater depths for longer times, but more importantly, as you have seen, getting them home safely again. And then he set out to do what he proposed. And Dr. George Bond, we call him the father of saturation diving. His work culminated in the Man in the Sea program, starting out with the Genesis Project and working its way through all 3 Sea Labs projects. Bond's work paved the way for saturation diving, which is key for several industries, including the offshore oil industries. Let's take a look. Many times, sat divers are crucial in getting that work done at depths in which the oil rigs are employed. Sat divers will often work a 28-day shift because when they report to work, they often go to depths in excess of 300, 400, 500 feet. And this does require a large footprint due to the massive logistics of sustaining a habitat, is what we call it, and up to possibly 6 individuals for that month at a time frame. So the expense is astronomical, and once again, as you see, it requires quite a platform. So now that you know a little bit about sat diving, let me introduce you to a challenge I had back in 2013. At the time, I was a waterfront operations manager for a test facility out there in the Pacific Northwest on Hood Canal. And we were tasked with validating a very complex, what we call concept of operation. Could we do something? In this particular case could we get a commercial off-the-shelf saturation dive system, which happened to be located in Morgan City, Louisiana, up to the Pacific Northwest, and have folks actually do a sat dive with that system. The logistics continually changed over the course of the product, but the end challenge of mobilizing that system on our board never did. And validating this concept of operation required a few things, including, hey, how do we fit 10 pounds of, well, you know what, into a 5-pound size? This system required an extensive number of subsystems, as you see here on the left-hand side, to support the overall sat dive itself. Control vans, environmental control units, hydraulic power units, winches, diving bells, launch and recovery or LARS system, and a host of other items, all of which were needed to fit into our barge. Our barge, though, wasn't your typical barge. There was a couple things that made it unique. First and foremost it was actually built for one purpose back in the day. But it was repurposed, and there's a lot of good things that have gone on and certainly continue to go on. We don't have propulsion, and we were dependent on contracted tugs, but that's okay. We could work around that. One of the big challenges we did have, though, was, hey, we were moored at a secure U.S. naval submarine base up in the Pacific Northwest, and we had limited access. That meant badging, trucking, crane services, all of that had to be looked at from a logistical aspect. And where we moored the barge happened to be on a section of the I-90 floating pontoon, and we had very specific considerations for that pontoon, including deck strength, span limits. We were limited to weight and height. So a lot of things to consider from that aspect. So it begged to answer the question, hey, is our barge even a possibility for this project? Now, one of the things we always like to look back on, hey, if you think you're going to be the showstopper, well, don't start the show. With a rental fee of over $1 million a month for that SAT system, I certainly didn't want to be, as a project or waterfront ops manager, I didn't want to be holding a short stick when everybody drew straws. So me and my incredible team there, we approached this particular challenge by trying to prove we could actually fail instead of how we could prove how we could succeed. Might sound a little strange, but given the number of entities involved, as you see here, and the cost, looking to fail kept it a little more real. Sometimes it's better to be able to say, I told you so, instead of, well, I thought we could. Once things got rolling, this was a no do-over event, and I've always been a firm believer in having a way out. Always better if you need to back out of a project before the complex gets really complicated, not after you answered yes to some utopian goal. So how do you plan for failure? Well, you have to know what a failure looks like. Failure as it looks like to you, your organization, or system. For now, let's define failure as an undesired event. When we look at the anatomy of an event here, as James Reason had published way back in the day, undesired things, that event you see in the center, rarely involves only one thing going south for you. In this particular model, Reason certainly reasons that a number of things, and he chose 4, go into an event. They include latent organizational weaknesses, they include flawed defenses, they include initiating actions, and of course, air precursors, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Air precursors, those things that continually work against you even before you start a project, or anyone else for that matter. So it's important to understand how air precursors work against you so you can keep them in mind as you set out to achieve your goals or the goals of your organization. So when we look at air precursors, these are a great HPI or human performance improvement tool to keep in mind. We use the acronym TWIN to help us remember them. They include task demands, work environments, individual capabilities, and nature, human nature in this particular case. After an event, many organizations will often ask, hey, how in the world did we dig ourselves into this hole? But maybe the better question to find an answer to is, hey, how do we get rid of the shovel? Keeping air precursors in mind during project planning is just one of many ways to help you and your organization get rid of that shovel. For the SAP project, we looked to the work environment portion of air precursors. We knew we were getting into some deeper things there, and we wanted to make sure that we were fully capable. So let's take a look at them. Now, the work environment here certainly consists of distractions, changes, displays, maybe out of service instruments, but where we chose to focus rested in these 4 areas here. And there's several others, so please don't limit yourself to these 8 here in the workaround. We wanted to look at what hidden system responses might be for us. We wanted to definitely be aware or plan on any unexpected equipment conditions or lack of alternative indications that would put us in that showstopper spot. And certainly we had a lot of folks involved, so the personality conflicts had to be looked at as well. So what did we do? Well, we wanted to prevent the event. In this case, for the SAT system loadout, we look for those air precursors within our work environment, and we look for any operational failure or showstoppers from a platform perspective. And we'll dig into that a little bit here in a second. We use pre-mortems, and those are, well, I don't want to try and find out how the individual or the project died after it's dead. I want to find out how we can not do how did the project die. we also use the term pre-causal analysis, and these two tools here help us reverse engineer events that we don't want. One effective tool that you can use within those pre-mortem or pre-causal analysis techniques is what we call an FMEA, or failure mode effects analysis. That in and of itself is a whole nother topic there. If you're interested, certainly we can share with you more later on that perspective there. But what we wanted to do is we really wanted to focus in on event occurrence so we could implement controls to prevent the occurrence. Hopefully that makes sense. And we set out to do that by looking at setting and achieving negative goals, something we don't want. And that was a strategy that was successfully used for us. And we can thank Dietrich Dorner for that. So first negative goal, all right, proving there's not enough deck space inside the barge. We really wanted to prove we didn't have the deck space early on. And we moved from the simple, such as putting tape on deck in the rough numbers or measurements that we were aware of, and we further developed those into complex CAD drawings to really ensure that we had identified those limitations. We identified big ticket items. That was crucial to us because we needed to make sure there were no unexpected equipment conditions, one of those work environment air precursors, such as an additional motor casing, a fitting, or lifting attachment not indicated on a drawing. Hey, you ever get surprised by working with an outdated drawing on a project before? Yeah, it happens. And what about hidden system responses? When you need winches to operate the lifting and, the launch and recovery system or the diving bell, what angles are required for that wire? What's the offset needed to accommodate run out on those winch wires? And are they going to interfere with some of those other systems that you have in place or some of the other options, operations? It's always better to make sure you can't do it before you say you can. All right, so our second negative goal, proving the system wouldn't fit or be able to get inside the barge. All right, so even if our deck space could accommodate the SAT system, would we be even capable of loading it onto the barge? You see, there were only 3 ways to get stuff inside that barge, so we had better made sure that we knew which entrance wouldn't work. We had to know if those 3 openings were not capable of accommodating loading out that equipment before we started the show. And we looked really hard at proving they couldn't, so we'd be confident in saying they would. And the last, well, certainly not the last, but one of the third negative goal that we looked at that I want to share with you today is proving we couldn't assemble that system once it got inside. Very important. It was vital to prove we couldn't do it more than we could prove that we could. Imagine getting all those parts inside from Morgan City, Louisiana, loaded into a barge, and then find out you don't have the clearance needed to put the puzzle together. That's a bad day. The structural engineer for the first Tacoma Narrows Bridge was a genius and go-to guy for building bridges, right up to the point where that bridge collapsed. We didn't want that on our watch, and then certainly, once again, don't want to be a showstopper. Were there positive goals involved with this project? There was certainly more than one. And we had to find some folks who were willing to work with some tough angles. We knew we were going to have to use some unorthodox angles to get some of this equipment in. And our local facility, they wouldn't entertain the thought. That's just not how they did business. And they communicated that very clearly to us. So we reached out to some others. Additionally, like you see there in the upper right-hand corner, the launch and recovery system was a multiple pick and assembly project due to the height restrictions on the barge roof. So we had to work with folks who were willing to work with us on getting that in. And certainly, as you see in the lower right-hand corner, our deck wasn't reinforced to handle the unique point loading, both the static loads introduced by the complex as well as the dynamic loads introduced by the Lars and winches, but we had some help there. And the fortunate beauty of all of that, by looking to fail, we were successful. We were able to validate that complex concept of operation using some of the simple HPI principles that we talked about, and our mission was accomplished very successfully. So as we kind of begin to wrap up your time with me today, I just want to give you kind of a few key takeaways that might be able to help solidify these. So events are undesired outcomes consisting of latent organizational weaknesses, flawed defenses, initiating actions, and like we talked about, air precursors. We know that air precursors can be remembered best by using the acronym TWIN. Once again, task demands, work environment, individual capabilities, and human nature. We just covered down on one of those today, but please join us when we introduce the other three later on. We know that premortems are always better than postmortems. Certainly, you would rather prevent the death than try and find out why one happened. And a pre-causal analysis, great for when you do for a non-event you plan for, because when you do that, you save more time, money, and effort than doing an actual causal analysis for an event that you hadn't planned for. Both those are used to reverse engineer an event and can help you turn potential events into non-events. And last but not least, by planning for an event occurrence, you can implement those controls needed to prevent the event occurrence. So I know we covered a lot of ground today, and hopefully gave you just kind of a small introduction, maybe a nugget or two that you could use to take back within your work area and implement. Certainly, always feel free to reach out to us if there's other areas that you are interested in or would like us to kind of go through with you on that. But as host today, Jessica, hopefully she's got a few questions out there that might have come in, and we'll see if we can work through a couple of those. And Jess, I'll hand it back off to you.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks so much. That was a lot of information, and thankfully I get to have you as a coworker, so I know that my questions on, hey, what was this, I can just ask you on my own. I do have two questions that came on. The first question was, you mentioned the FMEA. Does your team have any of those courses available, or any causal analysis courses?
Absolutely, Jess. We have both available. We can tailor those depending on your organization and where your focal points are, but absolutely. We've presented both of those to multiple industries, from Dexcom, which is a glucose monitoring system, to even iRobot, and then we've got some real positive feedback for them. So absolutely, please reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to help you through those.
Wonderful. And then the next question that came in is, do you plan or execute a full failure for improvements or a subset of failures?
That's a fantastic question, and hopefully I can answer it by this. Certainly we want to set positive goals when we set out to do a project, but based upon, for this particular project, based upon the number of entities involved and the amount of money, very substantial amount of money, we really wanted to prove that we could not do as much of that project as possible. Can you plan for everything? No, unfortunately you can't. And I think we're all pretty familiar with that. But can you look to certain things and say, hey, yep, this is going to be a problem area, such as, hey, do we have enough deck space? We know, can we get the system in? Can we assemble it? Those three things were critical for us. But hopefully this has been a helpful answer. Definitely want to look for failure. But you certainly need to keep those positive goals in mind as well. Certainly very tough, I like to say, very tough to put man on the moon when you're constantly looking to failure. But on the same token, you got to kind of look at those things that can really set you back or be that showstopper. Hopefully that's provided a little bit of benefit for that individual who asked the question.
Absolutely. And while we give our audience a little more time to submit questions, if you have any more, I want to remind you that these are performance tips, happen every Wednesday at 12 Pacific. Next week, so we will have Joe Esty Jr. He will be presenting on HAZCOM, and specifically how Mr. Yuck brought HAZCOM home. It was funny as we were talking about that. I thought, oh, you talk about HAZCOM, Mr. Yuck's the first thing that comes to mind. And then this coming Friday, in 2 days from now, it is our February continuing education event, and that will be with Joe Esty Sr., and he will be discussing change. How do you manage change? What does that look like on a personal level? What does that look like on a professional level? And there will be some tools for you guys to walk away with to really have a better grasp. Lord knows we went through a lot of changes these last couple of years, and I know that there's still a lot of changes on the horizon, and this is coming at a great time for us. Again, feel free to register for those. When we end the webinar, 2 pop-up windows will come there to make it easy for you to register. And don't forget to download those resources. Jason put together some great tools for you guys based on his presentation today. So there's a 3-page PDF for you to download that will have some more information and just some reminders on the twin principle and the causal analysis that he went through. I'd really like to thank you all for joining us today. It has been a pleasure bringing you this information. Feel free to check out our LinkedIn profile, our Facebook page, and YouTube for more information. And as always, lucasopt.com has the most up-to-date information on our team. So thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you next week.